Okay, everybody, we are back. We got a new show for you, and I just want to say thanks for taking the time to join us. Today, we are going to talk all about the Panthers' new coaching staff, and particularly what you can expect to see from Matt Rhule, Joe Brady, and Phil Snow. And to help us understand exactly what type of system and philosophy we're going to see from these coaches, I have asked my longtime friend and colleague from Football Guys, Jason Wood, to come join us. And he's got an extensive background in football. He knows all about coaching staffs, and he writes a couple articles every year all about coaches. So I wanted to ask him if he could talk to us about this new Carolina coaching staff. So, Jason, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. It's good to see you. It's I have to say, our generation, we're probably, even though we're pretty tech savvy, I feel like we were a little loath into jumping full on board the video chat world. And I think this got us over the hump. I think we're all converts. So
that's right.
I've done more video chats and Zooms and the like in the last 3 months than I had done in the 45 years I had been on this earth before that. So and this is our first. So
yeah, that's right.
So now normally we see each other at least once a year at our get together, but that didn't happen. So cheers, my friend. It's good to see you.
Yes, you too. And talk to us a little bit about your background in football, just so I can, kind of give a little bit of an idea to our watchers, our viewers here, a little bit about you. Obviously, we're both we work at Football Guys with the staff. I've been with Football Guys since 2007. And I kind of consider myself an OG, but you've been there before me. So I guess that would be combined. We're both been there for a while, but
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely both OGs. I don't know if you've mentioned this on your show before to listeners, or to viewers, I should say. But we try and get together as a group in Vegas each year for a retreat during one of the playoff weekends. And I think it was 2 years ago, because we had an influx of new staff because of the DFS side, which we have now. And we all got those name tags, and you and I were both decidedly in the OG side of the name tags. I was very proud of that. But my background is I wasn't a player of football. I was like 5'9", 150 in my junior year of high school, and then ended up 6'3", 190. But too little too late. But always loved it, like most American kids. And then nerdy stat dude, finance major, kind of at the cusp of loving sports and fantasy becoming a thing. First with baseball. I mean, my friends and I did Roto baseball at lunch, looking at the USA Today box scores. So just kind of a natural early petri dish test case for the advent of fantasy football. And then was just trolling around the internet almost 20 years ago, God's help us, looking for people to talk football with, and came across what was to become Football Guys. It was Mr. Football and then Cheat Sheets.
Right.
And was just on the message boards. And for those that don't know, there were these things called message boards where you used to just type long arguments to each other before you had to keep it all in 280 characters. And you could actually have nuance and facts and data to support your views. And I was just in there and, just chatted with a bunch of different people, and Joe and Dodds were both in there. That's where they met. And I guess, God, I think it's 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Joe said, "Hey, buddy, can I call you?" And he knew by then that I was in finance, and said, "Hey, I have this idea. We're gonna launch a fantasy football website for people are gonna pay us for our advice." And I half thought he was insane, but he asked if I could look at their business plan, and he sent it, and I gave my thoughts about the structure and whatnot. And then I thought that's all he wanted from me. And then he said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing for it?" And, there was no talk of compensation or it was just like, "Oh, sure. I mean, that sounds fun." He said, "Just basically the stuff that you write on the boards, just talk about it." And,
right.
And I started doing that. I think I was hired the day after Chase Stewart, and like a week after Morrill. I believe I was employee number 7.
Oh, wow.
So it's been 18 years, I think. And like you said, I mean, we've been here for the whole ride, and Football Guys has grown to a place I never would have conceptualized back then, where we have certainly one of the top spots is in terms of independent fantasy research out there. And, these days, I guess technically I'm senior editor, is whatever that title means, but we all wear multiple hats. And
right.
Yeah, I mean, right. I churn out a lot of content. I mean, it's not my I think I, like you, and there's kind of two parts of the football guys ecosystem. There's the guys that either are currently or aspire to be full-time fantasy analysts. And then there are those of us that have very significant careers outside of the fantasy world. And so either by necessity or just by desire, it's a part-time thing for us, or a side gig. And I'm definitely a side gigger, but as my wife will attest, I probably put out more content than most full-timers do. So it's like a second full-time job, but I do it because I love it. And and then you would kind of have to invite me on here because a bunch of years ago, we're always looking for new angles, and I just felt like there wasn't a lot being done about coaches, and started penning some articles each year about coaching changes and philosophy changes. And I know the content evolves each year. I try and tweak it to better present it in different ways, or to better meet what our customers most want to see. And then in terms of football, it should also be fully disclosed that I am a lifelong Philadelphia Eagles fan, like your wife, season ticket holder since 1996. And it's great. I love the game. My kids all played at one point. My oldest son is going to be a senior. He plays high school football. I am the high school announcer.
Oh, nice.
Go Kittle on Colts. And so it's a lot of fun. I've been an announcer for like 12, 13 years. So
that's cool. That's awesome. And so Panthers fans want to know all about their new coaches, right? Because Ron Rivera left. We've got a whole new regime in here. Matt Rhule. We've got Joe Brady, and we've got Phil Snow. Just real quick, first impressions. What do you have as far as a first impression on Matt Rhule? And also, what can you tell us a little bit about his coaching style, his philosophy that we're going to see?
Yeah. Oh, so if you'll allow me, let me just kind of do an opening soliloquy about coaching.
Sure.
Because I think one of the things that I've learned in trying to provide usable analysis to the Football Guys subscribers is that, like with many things that relate to trying to project forward, it's very, very difficult to get it right. And chances are that the coaches that are most likely perceived as great hires by the consensus are going to not turn out so great. And many that we think we scoff at and think, why did they do that, may end up being fantastic. And we could go into a laundry list of those. Certainly, as an Eagles fan, I can attest to that full-hearted. When we hired Andy Reid, he was a quarterback's coach, and everybody said, "You're insane for hiring a guy that's never called an NFL play. You're just trying to jump onto this Mike Holmgren coaching tree. It's absurd." Yeah. Obviously, that worked out quite well. Then we did what everyone thought we should do, and we hired Chip Kelly, and it was the greatest idea ever. That did not work out well. Then we hired Doug Peterson, and it was like, oh, here we go, just hiring Andy. We just back to Andy. And I remember a poll of NFL executives and personnel people rated Doug Peterson the 32nd coach in the NFL the year we hired him. And then we got our first Super Bowl with him. So, but you could take any franchise other than, say, the Patriots that have just had Belichick for 20 years, and you can map a similar course where if you try and isolate factors and say, well, these factors are the kind of head coach you should have, it's largely not true. It's hard to find hard correlation. There've been it's not fair to say don't hire a college coach. It's not fair to say don't hire an old assistant or don't hire a retread. Belichick was a retread, right? Andy Reid was a retread, so you can hire them. But Sean McVay was a young kid that had almost no experience. So there's always guys that succeed for different reasons. And so my rule of thumb, and this is leading into your question, and I think it's good news for Panthers fans. My rule of thumb has always been, if I were to magically be tapped to be the GM or owner of a team tomorrow, the only thing I insist upon is that you take a chance at greatness.
Yeah.
Because I think the likelihood that you're going to get it right is less than 50%, probably substantively so. So don't cap your upside in the process. Go for a guy that you think, if things go right, can be an elite top 5 coach and lead you to Super Bowls, right? And I do think that there are certain types of coaching prospects that fit into that, and Matt Rhule certainly does. Let's talk about the obvious. He has a reputation. He got this job because he is showing himself in the last decade to be incredibly good at pulling off very difficult jobs, right?
Yeah.
This isn't a guy like Ryan Day or Lincoln Riley who stepped into elite programs at the top and just had to maintain a high status quo. And by the way, I don't think that's very easy. I don't think stepping into a program that's already a prominent contender is necessarily an easy gig, but it's a different task. Temple, where Rhule was head coach before Baylor, I'm a Philly area guy, so Temple was always an also-ran in every sense of the word from a football perspective. They hadn't won 10 games since the early 70s. And then he took over, and in his last 2 years, he won his conference and he won 10 plus games. And that's an incredible feat for a place like Temple that has all kinds of recruiting issues geographically, funding issues, small endowment, the like. And then while Baylor has a reputation as being a good program, certainly, he, to his credit, took over at arguably at a point where nobody of note would have taken that job, because Art Briles was fired in disgrace, and the whole sexual harassment thing, and then the wrongful termination and the sanctions. And that was just a toxic job. And Matt Rhule's coming off of back-to-back 10-win division seasons and could have coached at Temple for another year or two and gotten probably any Power 5 job that was open. And he's like, I'll take Baylor. And he steps into Baylor, and they only won, I think, one game their first year. But the second year they won a bowl game. And then by his third year, which ends up being his last, they win 11 games in a major conference with an undermanned, from a scholarship and talent perspective, group of kids, finished 12th in the nation. And so while those two things are, like, what he did at Temple and what he did at Baylor are different, what I think the common thread is that he is not afraid of a big challenge. He is certainly willing to. He's got the inner confidence to go for it. He'll take a situation and he believes he can make any situation better. And he's so far proven that to be true.
Yeah. And, just the fact that, he takes these lower programs and turns them into respectable teams and programs. And he's got the same situation here in Carolina. So,
yeah. And he's even though he's a younger guy, he's an old school football guy, meaning that he's not someone that's going to wow you on the board, right? He's not. I don't mean to say he doesn't know his X's and O's. Obviously, you need to in today's football landscape to get to where he's gotten so quickly. But he's not going to reinvent the wheel. He is considered an offensive-minded coach because of the time that he's been head coach, but he's spent more years coaching defense. He's got very much a classic head coaching pedigree and a CV, where he really has coached every facet of the game, and he's coached from high school up. And I think the thing about him, at least, and this is by reputation, I've admittedly not met the man, but from what I understand, he's extremely organized. He's charismatic, a natural leader. And I think an important thing, and probably why he's had success in tougher situations, is he's very much willing to accept all blame, and then he distributes all praise, So,
and I think leaders do that.
That's right. No, I think, right. And there are certainly coaches with some success at that level that maybe don't have that reputation, but I think he does. And again, if I'm handicapping like what I want in my head coach, this is a guy that fits a lot of those boxes, right? Like he's not someone that's just going to be obsessed with one side of the ball. He's very much a CEO type, very much. And I think the other thing he's been exceptional at, both, and you see this in his recruiting, but also in his ability to recruit a staff, is he's just excellent at getting people to want to work for and with him. And so I think he's far better suited to being a head man than to being a coordinator. If for some reason he had been fired from Baylor and some team hired him as their offensive coordinator, I'd be much less excited about it. I think he is a head coach. And I think that's why he was smart to, even in his first year, not do what a lot of coaches do, and he's not going to call the plays, right? He's going to hand them to Joe Brady, which I'm sure we're going to spend plenty of time talking about. So, and then, the thing is schematically, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are wondering, like, well, what's the offense going to look like? I think really, if you're going to make an educated guess there, you have to really focus more on Joe, because Brady's going to be calling the plays. And I think that it's already clear both in how Rhule handled his collegiate duties, but also what he said since he got this job. He's not going to really mess. He hired Brady and his other offensive assistants to build this offense. And unless they screw it up royally, he's going to let them do their thing. But that said, we should make mention that he's definitely a big believer in zone blocking run schemes, right? I mean, that's been a consistent part of any offense he's touched, including when he was at Temple and Baylor. A lot of people would say that he's favored a balanced attack. Now, I caution to read too much into that because, again, what we call balanced in college and what works in college in terms of run-pass ratio, I think it's pretty clear that unless you're the Baltimore Ravens, it's hard to pull off in the NFL. So I'm not sure that means we're going to see like a relatively run-heavy scheme from these guys, although it would arguably make some sense to do that given McCaffrey there. But at least historically speaking, based on what we know from college, he was very much a fan of a balanced offense with plenty of run plays. So yeah, I mean, I think that getting back to the caveat of it's hard to rank these guys without them actually doing anything yet. Right. I personally like the Rhule hire because I think he is the kind of person that you want at the helm of a rebuilding franchise.
Yeah, and one of the first duties that he has as coach is to hire a staff. And, he did so with Joe Brady. I think that was partly his decision. And I don't know how much of a decision it was of all him or Marty Herney, the general manager, but I'm sure they collectively – and Tepper, right? They collectively came up with a plan of action. And Panthers fans are excited about Joe Brady and his offense. Why? Because of what he did at LSU and what he did for Joe Burrow. Talk to us a little bit about, Joe Brady, what he did for Joe Burrow. Because Burrow, if you remember 2018, even with LSU, he wasn't, all that. It became 2019 and Brady coming in where he really kind of turned it on. Is that a coincidence? Is it a number of different factors? But, the common denominator here is Brady. So how much of that, of Burrow's success was due to Brady, and what can we kind of expect to see from him?
Yeah, I mean, the trite answer is how much was Brady responsible for Burrow? Well, we'll see in September, right? I mean, that's but listen, I mean, I kind of think Occam's razor. I know a lot of my buddies that I go to Eagles games with aren't huge college football fans, so I'm assuming because anyone watching this is interested in the coaching, they've looked into LSU or they're familiar. But I mean, we live in a world of hyperbole, right? But let's be clear. I mean, the 2019 LSU Tigers offense was very arguably the best college offense in history. I've seen some interesting arguments that make it second or third behind, say, like the Cam Newton Auburn team or, but point being, statistically speaking, it's nearly, if not completely unmatched. And from a passing perspective, absolutely unmatched. And then from a results perspective, I mean, to go 15-0 in the SEC is ridiculous. Burrow had, set all-time records for passing touchdowns, 60, 65 total touchdowns, set an all-time NCAA for passer rating, first ever 6,000-yard offensive player with 5,000 plus of those coming from the air. LSU, I think, as a team, was the first team to ever have a 5,000-yard passer, 1,000-yard rusher, which was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and 2,000-yard receivers in the same season. So, I mean, this thing was, and I watched a lot of it. I don't know if you watched a lot of college football. It was beautiful. And
it was
again,
a video game.
It was a video game. And the thing is they did all this. This is not a Hawaii or SMU or Texas Tech gimmick. This is against the toughest conference with the toughest NFL-ready defensive players and the most proven defensive schemes in the college ranks week after week. So it was an absolute A+++. So I understand the excitement. Why did it happen? It's a perfect storm, right? Confluence. There's a million reasons how it all came together. But I will say this. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of this Joe Burrow's kind of been portrayed in the mainstream by a little bit as like this Tom Brady, who is big college program kid, but came out of nowhere. And I mean, let's be clear. Burrow was a 4-star recruit. He wasn't a 5-star, but he was a 4-star recruit. He was Mr. Football in Ohio, committed to Ohio State. And committed as a pro-style offensive kid. So, there were reasons at Ohio State why he didn't get his shot. And I don't really care or know what really happened, right? The point is, it's a tough business. It's high-end. He didn't get his shot. He transfers. Like you said, his first year at LSU, I think a lot of us perceived him as just a game manager like LSU normally has, just a kid that's smart enough to just keep the offense moving, just make sure they don't make big mistakes, and let the offense go through the running game, and then let the defense win championships. That's what it felt like. It's what it looked like. And then enter Joe Brady, who is really a Cinderella story, right? I mean, here's a guy that was an assistant, basically quality control guy less than a decade ago,
Yeah.
a nerdy grad assistant, and just moved up the ranks. And as the story goes, LSU invited Steve Ensminger, who is actually LSU's offensive coordinator. That's another misnomer. A lot of people think of Brady as the offensive coordinator. He wasn't. Steve Ensminger was and is the offensive coordinator, although Brady did call the plays. But Ensminger had some connection to the Saints and invited the Saints coaching staff to come, as happens a lot with these big programs, during the offseason and just do a little coaching tutorial and chat about ideas. And Carmichael came with the staff, and Brady was asked to come along as kind of an afterthought, just eyes and ears guy in the room. And at some point during the day, Brady got his chance to go up on the board and start whiteboarding. And Ensminger was like, "Who is this kid?"
Oh, wow.
And made his impression. This was the year before, and was just blown away by this young guy that was intuitive and well-spoken and articulate and had these bold ideas. And he just made note of the kid. And then when they decided they needed to take a chance and boost the offense, he approached Ed Orgeron and said, "Remember that kid from the Saints? We should get him." And I give Ensminger a tremendous amount of credit. I mean, here's a dude that's the offensive coordinator on a team that's considered to be a national championship, but for its offensive potency. Yeah. And he basically he advocated to bring in his replacement effectively. And it worked out beautifully, So, yeah, I mean, the chips couldn't have fallen in a better way, right? I mean, Joe Brady there was absolutely no reason to think that he was ready for that challenge. And he was absolutely more than ready for it. I mean, he dominated it.
Yeah, and Panthers fans are excited about what this offense can be with Joe Brady. I mean, they already have the pieces in place with McCaffrey and DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and Robbie Anderson thrown in there, and now Teddy Bridgewater. And I don't know if there's a correct answer because we don't know yet, but I'm really curious to see how Brady's offense is going to be implemented here in Carolina and how Teddy Bridgewater is going to handle that. Is it the same type of offense that he had in New Orleans? I mean, is Bridgewater going to be familiar with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up. That's the key point, I think, of all of this is that, I think one of the interesting things this year that's so much different is that we're not sure if, when, and how teams will practice play together before the season. Now, it's looking more and more as we record. It looks more and more like we're going to have a full regular season. Probably on time. I mean, nothing's official, but it does seem like we're going in that direction. Even the really badly hit states like New York and New Jersey and California have effectively given the green light to pro sports returning as long as they follow the rules. So I'm going to assume, for the sake of this conversation, we have a full regular season, but we don't know if they're going to be able to do a full training camp and a full slate of preseason games. So if we don't, I think it'll be an interesting year in terms of getting new systems integrated. New players, integrate, especially a new quarterback. I mean, that would be a tough. If it could be tough for you guys in the sense that if we do have a really truncated time where everybody's together practicing, that's not ideal for, like you said, a new head coach with a new scheme and a new offense and a new starting quarterback, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think if there's a silver lining there, you just hit the nail on the head. It's that Bridgewater and Brady they speak the same language. I know a lot of people want to know, like, what specifically is Brady's system. Well, I mean, we only have 1 year of him as a play caller, so understand, of course, this is a small sample size, so it's dangerous to extrapolate. But we can go on what he says and what we've seen. And what he says is his system is very much Belichickian. It's matchup based. It's like McVay. He's taken bits and pieces from all the different offenses that he's coached against and played with, and he's just tried to cut up into a montage of things he thinks he works in certain situations, and he's very much wants to play the matchups, and he wants to try and create mismatches. And again, we have 1 year of him doing so, and he's done an exceptional job in that 1 year of doing that, and that's what he intends to do in Carolina. Now, I know some people can cringe and say, "Oh, that's like such a trite answer, like, oh, I'm just going to create mismatches. Don't all coaches do that?" You'd be surprised. And I think the best way to think about this is comparing what you're going to see from Brady with what you saw from Norv. listen, Norv is, in my opinion, a Hall of Fame coach. I think for what he's done as an offensive coordinator in nearly 30 years, I think he'll someday get consideration for the Hall as an assistant coach. And Norv is one of the most successful acolytes of the Air Coryell system, coaching tree. And Carolina, interestingly, under Rivera, really stuck with the Coryell system for the most part. Different guys. You had Chudzinski and then Shula and then Norv. And there were periods when Cam was healthy and you had the right personnel that it was wonderful and highly effective. People kind of get caught up in this, oh, you don't want to be predictable. Well, predictability works fine if people can't stop.
If you can handle it.
Yeah, Tennessee, right? Like everybody knew what Tennessee was going to do, but nobody could stop it until the AFC Championship game. So, and I think, so it's not, but I think my point being is with Norv, Norv was incredibly predictable. Like by now we know what Norv's system offense we know what it looks like. And again, it's certainly much better than a lot of other NFL offenses, but it got to a point, especially with no difference maker quarterback last year, where it was stymied. And I think with Brady, if he does what he wants to do, and if it's going to be successful, it will not be predictable. It will be based on mismatches and their ability to create mismatches, both in terms of the personnel they have, who's healthy in that given day, who's feeling right, and then more importantly, who they're playing against, right? Where are the holes on that defense that they can scheme? But from a terminology standpoint, yeah, it's New Orleans. It's his playbook and his route trees and his terminology and his cadences and his audibles and his adjustments. They're Saints terminology. So I think Bridgewater will fit right in. He's probably already got the playbook memorized, is my guess. No, because it's the same. It's that terminology. He's not learning a new language. Now, what's interesting though is this will be a completely different language and terminology for most
everybody
of the
else.
Panthers. Yeah. So that's the trick, right? Is that for almost everybody else, it's going to be like learning a foreign language. Really, it's that different. I think honestly, they're that different because Peyton is a West Coast offense guy by school, by tree, but to be fair, the reason that the Saints are what they are is because Peyton, like Andy Reid, was very, very innovative and aggressive in adopting things like the spread and RPO concepts to make his offense a vertical attacking version of the West Coast, right? Because when we think of West Coast and like the 49ers and the Bill Walsh era, it was dink and dunk. It was, we're going to use the pass to control the game in a way that the pass never did before. And that's evolved now to where a lot of these really great West Coast acolytes like Reed and like Peyton are effectively using an offense that Bill Walsh wouldn't even recognize. Same terminology, right? There's the X, the Z, the Y, like the playbook reads the same, but the way they go about executing is totally different than Walsh ever did. It just is a different, it's schematically so different. And I think that's, Brady had as hard as that. He spent a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, but he spent a few significant years at Penn State under Moorhead and Moorhead's like a 5 wide guy till he dies. If you look at LSU last year, they ran a ton of 4 and 5 wide, understandably. Why wouldn't they? But Brady has said, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your show, Brady has said in the last few months when he's discussed the Panthers, they ran 4 and 5 wide because they had arguably the greatest wide receiver class in SEC history. And so with Carolina, it's just about, is that what the personnel invites or not? But that's it. I think we'll see a lot more. We're going to see a lot more 3 wide and 4 and 5, empty backfield. And we're going to see, like 2 tight ends. I think that will be the norm.
And I think we're seeing that also too, just around the league.
Yeah.
We're seeing more
Eagles.
The 2 tight end set. But and I think you made a good point about how Brady is going to use his personnel the best that he can and to their abilities. I'm actually curious to see what Curtis Samuel is going to do in this offense because of what his pedigree is, what his ability and talent is that we saw at Ohio State. And we sort of saw, 19 rushes last year that led all receivers in rushing.
Yeah. Yep.
But what are we going to see in Brady's type of offense? So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of buildup. We're excited, of course, with the season to begin, even if it's a truncated season, like you mentioned. So that's the offense, right? The defense is kind of what scares me. I mean, you lost Luke Kuechly, you lost a lot of different players. Kuechly obviously being the big one, and you have a new staff. You've got Matt Rhule, who brings in Phil Snow, who he's worked with for a long time. At Baylor, though, I mean, the Baylor defense in the Big 12, I mean, the Oklahoma scored 100 points on them in 2 games. What's the NFC now? The NFC South, which is this juggernaut of a division, what are they going to do? So I'm curious what you can talk to us about with Phil Snow, the defense, and what we can expect out of him, because myself and other fans probably don't know too much about Phil Snow and what he could bring.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting, right? Like it's kind of I feel like it's this unwritten rule with these new young coaches that they need to have their young gun assistant, right-hand man, and then their old dog.
Yeah.
And Phil's definitely Rhule's old dog, right? Phil is 64, so he's an older gentleman. He's been coaching for nearly 40 years. So, it's, again, for those that don't know, your fans out there listening, he has been with Matt Rhule as his defensive coordinator during all of Matt's head coaching years, so at Temple and at Baylor. But he's had a litany of other jobs. They actually met way back at UCLA together when Matt was actually a grad assistant working for Phil Snow. He was just trying to get into
the league, right? Or into a type of role that he was interested in.
Right, exactly. So Phil Snow is an old school dude. He is, I think, by reputation, a very good teacher. He's a keep it simple, stupid guy. He often talks about that the best teachers are those that can make the most complicated things seem really simple, because if you can't explain it in a few short words on the practice field, nobody's going to learn it, which I think is good to hear, because, the worst thing you want to do is implement a really high concept, complex scheme in year one. I think it's a defense based on his prior stints where there is a layering. I think it would be unrealistic, or let me say it another way. It would be far more realistic of you and other fans to expect the offense to get off and running quickly than it would be the defense. And that doesn't mean that Phil isn't doing his job or his assistants aren't doing their job. I just think that he's kind of a tear it down and rebuild it type of guy. It's interesting. He ran at Baylor a 3-4 front. But most of his career has been 4-3. Rhule, who again was his head coach, also considered himself more of a 4-3 guy. I think, like most coordinators these days, when asked what front he runs, he tells you it's multiple. I mean, they all say multiple now. So he swears you're going to see 4-man, 3-man. You're going to see the 4-6, the bear. You're going to, maybe, and you probably will. I think that looking at the personnel, it's probably, I think a lot of people expect it to be a 4-3 in terms of the opening snap. But I don't know that you should read too much into that one way or the other. I will say that it's pretty clear that regardless of what his front seven looks like, he has always put a tremendous amount of responsibility and pressure on his safeties. He expects his safeties to wear all the hats. He really does want them to be able to bring pressure, to cover, to tackle, to be the floor generals. And his better defenses have been when he's had those kinds of guys. His worst units have been when he's had inexperienced guys at that position. You mentioned, and I don't profess to have as much knowledge about the Panthers depth charts as you do, but I mean, you obviously lost Kuechly, who, while certainly dealing with the head traumas and whatnot, was amazing when he was on the field. And then you lost McCoy and Poe, who, again, I'm not saying they're irreplaceable, but at least in terms of like Pro Football Focus, they were the top graded defenders outside of Kuechly on the roster last year. So one might argue you've lost your 3 best defenders statistically speaking from last year.
Yeah, Mario Addison, Eric Reed.
Yeah, exactly.
James Bradbury.
Yeah, no question. Bradbury, obviously, personally speaking, I think Bradbury's a little overpaid in the free agency market. But the question is not so much did someone else overpay for him, but do you have a viable replacement for him?
Right.
You do have Trey Boston, who I know they gave a big contract to, and he's certainly talented. So I think he'll play one of those. He'll play an important role, succeed or fail. I mean, that's up to him. But I think he will be asked to play a pretty important role very early for Snow. I think that I think the other thing about him is that he is very much like, if you look, you mentioned Baylor gave up a ton of points, but the other thing is he was very clear when he came to Baylor, because they were a 1-win team that first year, that because of the Art Briles thing, I think they had 20 freshmen that played snaps on defense his first year. And so his view there was that, they just had a young, undermanned unit. And as a result, they had to be very aggressive. He said he knew they weren't going to be able to stop the high-end offenses consistently. So they had to try and force turnovers and get pressure and take risks. And whether or not that plays in the NFL or that's even his plan, I'm not sure. But I know that he definitely is one of those coaches that will keep turning up the risk dial based on whether he thinks he needs to or not, right? So I think in a perfect world, he'd be bend but don't break. But if he doesn't think he's got the Jimmies and the Joes, he'll try and do the X's and the O's, right? I think he's more of that kind of guy. And I don't expect we're going to see, whereas I think Rhule and Brady envision being Belichickian on offense. I don't think Snow's going to say we're going to just rip up the game plan and come up with a new one each week. I think he will implement a very, very reasonable, well-structured base defense that he's confident he can teach them all to do really well, and then continually layer on more things as the talent and or the experience warrant it. So, yeah, I mean, I if I'm handicapping, I think I have the Panthers defense like bottom 5 or 6 in the league this year from a fantasy perspective. And again, I could be wrong. I'm not Nostradamus, but I just don't think they have the personnel to live up to championship expectations this year.
Yeah, and they're getting there, and by all accounts, I think fans realize that. I don't think fans are projecting Carolina to be an 8-win, 9-win, 10-win team. We're thinking
right.
5 wins, 6 wins, maybe, right? Yeah. Of course, you've got a really difficult division, especially this year.
Yeah.
But looking forward, the Drew Breeses and the Tom Bradys and even the Matt Ryans are going to be out in a couple of years.
Absolutely, right.
So they're kind of positioning themselves well for the future. And
you think Teddy Bridgewater isn't looking forward to the day in 2 years when it's when it's him versus Taysom Hill?
Yes. I'm excited for Bridgewater. It's such a tragic story, with him hurting his knee in practice and a freak injury like that, to be out almost 2 years and then to come back, to have the wherewithal to come back, to have the opportunity to come back with the Jets. That didn't quite work out. He went with the Saints. That didn't quite work out, but sure. You know what? He did well in his limited opportunity, and it bought him the position he has now. So I'm excited to see what Bridgewater can do. I like the fact that he's matched with Joe Brady.
Yeah.
I'll be pulling for him. And we can't really talk about Bridgewater without mentioning Cam Newton because it's his replacement. And I'm curious to see.
Guys, I know a lot of people saw it coming, and I know we on staff were. I wasn't surprised by the way it went down this offseason. But that being said, love or hate him or somewhere in between, the dude was absolutely iconic in the face of the franchise really since they've existed, at least in terms of notoriety outside of Carolina. So
yeah, there's a lot of people who are a little bit upset about how Cam was treated on his way out in Carolina, and
damn hedge fund guys, Tepper's a cold-hearted snake.
Well, we've seen that, right? And now we've seen it in relation to us. So, so if I could ask you this, if I could ask you one adjective to pick to describe the 2020 Panthers, what would you come up with?
Uncertain.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, and again, you asked for one word, but I think but to expound on that, I think for me, if I have crystal ball, I think expect short-term pain for long-term gain, right? I have no problem with the hires. I think they all make sense. Like I told you, I think Rhule's the kind of head coach you should be going for, recognizing that he could be a total washout, but go for it, right? I think he's the kind of guy he clearly is able to make a quick turnaround, and that's kind of the NFL now. Long gone are the days where you can hire a guy and give him 5 years to just try and build into a contender. I think they want to see success quickly, and I think to do that, you need a guy that's shown he can do that, and Rhule's certainly done that. I think, again, Brady is incredibly inexperienced, but man, he's a rocket ship, and you don't, much like with McVay when he was first coming up, you just can't find a person that talks about the guy that doesn't say glowing words about his intelligence and his ability to process information on the fly. And I don't think he has a photographic memory like McVay, but it sounds like the dude is just a sponge and just remembers things and has great recall and is just excellent at articulating his ideas. And but like like we've talked about, I mean, there's lots of change. You've got new coaches at all three major positions. You've got an offensive line with 3 new starters projected. You've got a new franchise quarterback. You're also integrating, like we've said, a bunch of newer guys, younger guys on defense. I like a lot of what they did in the offseason and through the draft on defense prospectively, but they're going to be young. And again, that's why I say long-term gain. I have no reason to think, and I think Tepper, putting aside him as a human being, I mean, he's got more money than any other owner. I think he's committed to winning. He's incredibly competitive. I know him a bit from my industry, and he's incredibly competitive. I think he'll give whoever is in charge of the franchise all the money in the world and the resources in the world to make a contender. And so I think you're in good shape. Like, I think the franchise is going to be in good shape, but you're just in one of those periods where you've let a lot of icons who were probably near or at the end of their productive ropes go, right? I mean, Cam and Kuechly, and I don't think it was wrong to move on with all these guys, but I do think that inevitably makes this year uncertain. I think, would I be shocked if the offense clicks quickly and you guys are 8-8 or 9-7, even if the chips fall where they may? No, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I'm not expecting it, but I wouldn't be shocked. But if you were 4-12 and just things, I mean, that wouldn't shock me either. I just think, but I'd be much more surprised if you were 4-8, 4-12, or 6-10 in 3 years. That would surprise me,
And like you mentioned earlier in the show, the opportunity to hire Matt Rhule was the opportunity for greatness, right? So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, the Giants were desperate for him. I work in Manhattan. I mean, they were fans were sure they were getting him. So
So
I think he took less money in Carolina. As I understand, he supposedly took less money to go to you guys. So there you go.
Yeah. So all we can expect is, for an opportunity to rebuild. As much as people say this isn't a rebuild, it is. And
it is. I don't. Is that what the talk down there is? It's not a rebuild, because it is a rebuild. I mean.
No, I mean, people are thinking, well, is it a rebuild or is it a reload? But then you look at the defense, and it's definitely a rebuild.
Yeah,
that's the coaching staff, the players.
That's a tough thing with these iconic quarterbacks, right? Because you and I know, because we're number crunchers. I mean, Cam hasn't been Cam.
Yeah.
I mean, consistently in a while now. In 2018, he had a very good year, but I'm just, you know what I mean. So it's like, to me, it's pretty clearly a rebuild, and that's okay. I mean, I get it as someone who gets quite beholden emotionally to Eagles players on their way out. I can totally understand as a fan not liking the way it went down, especially because a lot of us thought it was going to happen anyway. So you could have done it a different way, given them a better chance to go somewhere else and sign or trade. I mean, so I don't have any issues with fans being upset with the way it went down. But the decision to do it, I think, was the logical one. And we've kind of danced around Bridgewater. I don't, again, full disclosure, I'm a Louisville college football fan. So it's a good time for me. I've got 2 starters in the league right now.
That's right.
Him and Lamar.
Yeah.
I've never been a huge Bridgewater fan. Like I thought in Minnesota, he was very much hamstrung, both by his own timidness and the system. And then obviously he got hurt and it didn't really have a chance to blossom. And it's interesting because if you look at his time in New Orleans, I mean, he was 5-0 last year, and I think he would not be your new starting quarterback were it not for those 5 games.
That's right.
But what's interesting is, if you look at like things like average depth of target, ADOT, and adjusted net yards per attempt, he looked a lot like the guy we saw early in his career in Minnesota as a dink and dunker, leaving big chunk plays on the field for the first 2-3 games of his Saints tenure as well. And then I would love to be in the room and know what happened, because those last 3 games, he was a completely different player. He started trusting himself and maybe his line and his coaches, and started looking downfield and making those big plays. And those 3 games turned him into the Sanders' new starting quarterback. And I hope that was like a light clicking, and I hope that because Brady's going to run the same kind of aggressive downfield system, that it all fits like Legos together. But we have roughly 40 games of him as a very timid player, unwilling or unable to see downfield opportunities. And then we have 3 games, albeit his most recent, where he looked like a younger version of Drew Brees. So, we know he can do it now because we've seen it in that system, which is great. It's the system that so we saw him do it in the same system. But it is a very, very small sample size. Very small.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an opportunity, and it's one that us Panthers fans are looking forward to. And Jason, I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this, about our new coaching staff. And I learned some things. Hopefully the viewers were educated as well. And I just kind of want to take the time to say, thanks for watching, and give us a like, leave a comment, say what you thought. And if you liked it, subscribe. We would love to have you. And Jason, you can be reached at Twitter, which is right on the screen there, at FBG Wood.
Yes, sir.
And we appreciate you coming on and talking to us about the Panthers. And thanks so much.
You got it. Draft Robbie Anderson late.
There you go. Thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Take care.
All right.